It's me, Vicky Marie. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in this crazy world we're living in. In today's video, we're going to talk about, obviously, it'll be sad because this is a true crime video, and all true crime, any video you make about true crime is going to have sad elements in it. But also, this story that I'm going to tell you today, this true crime story that seems unbelievable, as you'll find out as we get into it. But it's true, absolutely true, 100% true. And this is, as I say, a sad story, of course. There are victims in this story. But it's also a story of courage, of bravery, of doggedness, of perseverance. So although it's a story of evil in many ways, it's also a story of positivity. And that's important too. And it's important that we take away from this story the positive parts of it. And it is a story of justice. It was late justice. Justice was a long time coming, but it did come. So, okay, let's chat. So we're going to start with the story of Cathy Terkanian. Cathy was only 16 when she got pregnant, and she gave birth to a daughter, Alexis Miranda Badger, on June the 23rd in 1974. Now, Cathy's home life was difficult. She had no partner, and she had an uneasy relationship with her abusive mother. So at 16, it was a difficult situation for this young girl to be in. And her mum did not help. She believed her mum when her mum said her baby would be better off if she put her up for adoption. She'd have a proper family and everything she wanted and needed. Cathy did not want to put her daughter up for adoption, but also she was scared. She was too young. She did not think that she could cope with this baby. She felt the responsibility weighing down on her. And what her mother said just confirmed the way she felt, that she did not deserve this baby. She was not capable of looking after this baby. And this baby would have this fantastic life if she gave her up for adoption and she was being adopted by a proper family. So when her 10-month-old daughter Alexis, when her daughter Alexis was 10 months old, she gave her up. She signed away her maternal rights forever. And she really, really felt at the time that this would give her daughter a better life. She did not feel capable of looking after her, as was confirmed by her own mother. She hoped, though, that one day maybe Alexis would come looking for her. But it was, unfortunately, a decision in giving up Alexis that Cathy was going to regret for the rest of her life. Time went on, and in 1999, Cathy received a letter from the adoption agency. She opened it excitedly, hoping against hope that that beautiful baby she had surrendered to what she thought would be a loving family might now be looking for her. However, a bombshell was waiting for her in that envelope. And it would change her life forever. And it would set her on a quest for truth and justice for the daughter she had given away. She learned in that letter that, in fact, her daughter had gone missing from her adoptive home on March the 11th, 1989, at the age of 14 years old. This especially struck a chord with Cathy because she had left home at 14 years old also. Anyway, this was 10 years earlier. And her daughter, Alexis, as she knew her, had been missing for 10 years. Human remains had been found in a Wisconsin cornfield and were believed to possibly be Andrea Bowman. That was Alexis's new adopted name. And it was thought it might be her due to similarities in facial structure. Now, throughout this video, I will be referring to Alexis, sometimes as Andrea, sometimes as Alexis. It's difficult, isn't it? Because the name she was given by her adoptive parents was Andrea, but her birth name was Alexis. And you'll see as this goes on, sometimes I just can't bring myself to call her Andrea, because that was the name given to her by her adoptive parents. But then other times it feels like, so this person, the victim, or this particular victim I'm going to be talking about, I will be referring to sometimes as Andrea and sometimes as Alexis. So police had requested a sample of Cathy's DNA to see if these human remains that had been found were in fact Alexis or not. So they'd gone obviously to her adoptive parents, but their DNA wouldn't have any relevance. So the police had gone to the adoption agency and asked them to contact Cathy. So Cathy gave her DNA and she waited anxiously for the results. So these remains, as I say, had been found in Wisconsin, nearby where it turned out that Andrea had gone to live after she was adopted. So time passed, waiting for the DNA results, and Cathy was overwhelmed with relief when the DNA results came back and determined it was not her biological daughter. It was some other poor soul. But the fact remained, where was Alexis? If those remains weren't her and she'd been missing for 10 years, where was she? Cathy felt in her bones that some foul play had befallen Alexis, and she swore to her missing daughter that she would discover the truth and find her. But was she even still alive? I think it's strange how Cathy immediately, although she'd never really, after 10 months old, she did not know her daughter, did she? But she had that strong feeling right from the word go that something had happened. And you'll see as we go through this true crime story, there were times when she got feelings about other things too that proved to be true. is there this bond or this, was it like a psychic bond? Was it a blood bond? You know, was she intuitively still tied in with her daughter even though she'd given her up for adoption? Let me know what you think. Leave me a comment and let me know why do you think Cathy had such a strong bond with her daughter, even though she hadn't actually seen her since she gave her away at 10 months old. Anyway, Alexis, now Andrea, had been adopted by a childless couple, Dennis and Brenda Bowen. Dennis and Brenda had been childhood sweethearts, seemed like to have a perfect marriage. But Brenda had been told by doctors that she was unlikely to ever have children due to a problem with her uterus. So they adopted Alexis and they renamed her Andrea. And they felt happy that their family was complete now. So they were both apparently respectable members of the Allegan County community in Michigan. They were both working. They were Sunday school teachers. And by the time Andrea went missing, they also then had a second daughter, Vanessa, a biological daughter who had been a complete surprise when she came along in 1988, which was a year before Andrea disappeared. Apparently, Andrea had adored her baby sister and she'd really enjoyed looking after her. Her friends said she took care of the baby all the time. She changed her diaper, she bottle fed her, and this friend added that she would not have left Vanessa alone there because she didn't want to leave her. Even though she was having problems with her parents, she was having problems with her parents at the time. She disappeared like any teenager. Don't forget what teenagers are like at 14. That's when they start to rebel against their parents, adoptive parents or biological parents, just parents, isn't it? But Andrea's friends insisted that she loved her little sister and she enjoyed looking after her and she would never have left her on her own. And she had told her friends that one day when Vanessa was older, she was going to leave and she was going to go and find her real mum. Which is very, very sad because she never got a chance to do that because she disappeared. But the thought that she was going to go looking for Cathy, I think must have made Cathy feel better when she heard that she had said that. Anyway, Dennis and Brenda, her adoptive parents, had said that Andrea had been fine until she became a teenager. They had a good relationship. Then when she became a teenager, she started to rebel. She would act out, she would talk back, she was taking drugs, etc., etc. All of the things that a lot of teenagers do, isn't it, when they get to that rebellious phase. On the fateful day when she had disappeared, Dennis had taken Brenda to work with the baby. And he said that when he returned from that short trip to take Brenda to work with Vanessa, she'd gone. Along with money. She'd taken money. Her case was classified by the police as an endangered runaway. And in the early days of the investigation, if you can call it an investigation, there were various sightings of her. This thing about false sightings, I wish people would not, make claims that they've seen missing people. How often does that happen? It's so misleading to investigations, isn't it? Anyway, because she apparently had been seen various places, I think the police were just thinking I mean, okay, she was only 14 and she was a minor, but they felt that she'd run away, for her own volition, because she was just at that stage in her life where she felt like running away. But as we'll see later, it was it's almost like, do the police or did they then, maybe not so much these days, but did they just make too many assumptions? Anyway, so when Cathy so her case was classified as an endangered runaway. There were various sightings of her, but as time went on, these dwindled, and there stopped being reports of any sightings of her. When Cathy, her biological mum, found out all this, she was determined to find out what had happened to Alexis, her daughter. She just felt there was something to be found out here, and she swore to her daughter there and then that she would find out what had happened to her and where she was. But as a mother who gave up her child for adoption, she had no rights, no maternal rights. She could not even know her new name. However, a little bit of investigation into luckily the internet was in its fledgling stages then. So a little bit of investigation on Google as to missing people in that area. And she did have, of course, Alexis's date of birth. That was really all she knew about her. And so after a little bit of investigation by Cathy and her husband, so Cathy had married, but had no other children. They came up with this, that's how they found out the name, Andrea Bowman. And Cathy set up a Facebook page and a classmates.com page in her name, looking for information about Andrea. And bit by bit, I was going to say poco a poco there, bit by bit, friends started to come forward. Classmates of Andrea's came forward. And that's how Cathy discovered a lot about the family dynamics of the adoptive family dynamics. And it unfortunately was not all welcome news. Also, through Facebook, etc., she became in contact with Carl Koppelman. Carl is a very interesting character. He's a sort of forensic web sleuth, part-time, who is dedicated to solving missing person cases in his spare time. In his full-time job, he's an accountant, or he was an accountant, he may be retired now. But he would help with cases of missing people by doing forensic reconstructions of faces, etc. And all this he would do in his spare time. So she got friendly with him. They started communicating a lot. And it was him who explained to her how the freedom of information system worked. Now, from Andrea's friends that Cathy had met up with through contacting them through the Facebook page, she found out that, in fact, Andrea had a very uneasy relationship with her adoptive father, Dennis. In fact, they themselves had witnessed him being physically abusive to her. And, if somebody is physically abusive to their child in public, makes you wonder what they're doing to them behind closed doors, doesn't it? Anyway, so apparently as well, Andrea had reported to the school that Dennis was molesting her. Brenda, her adoptive mother, now you'll get angry with Brenda as we go along. Well, if you're anything like me, you will. Brenda, Dennis's wife, they'd been together since they were high school sweethearts. she'd refused to believe Andrea. She called her a liar. She just blanket refused to believe what Andrea was telling her and took Dennis's side very strongly. And apparently, according to friends, had seen Dennis be abusive to Andrea in front of Brenda, hit her across the face, literally at the table where Brenda was sitting with the baby, Vanessa, and Brenda had just ignored it as if it never happened. She seemed to turn blind eyes to obvious displays of violence against her adopted daughter. She could not accept anything bad about Dennis. And it was around this time that Andrea disappeared. And Dennis said she just was not there after he returned from taking Brenda to work. So really, you can think that at the time, how was this not investigated? You've got an adopted father who is, the daughter has reported him for being abusive. Friends have seen him slap her literally across the face right in front of them. And more things that we will find out about Dennis that the police could easily have found out. Why was this case not investigated at the time? I think it's shocking. I think the police made up for it later. But the police at the time they never took this case seriously. Anyway, as Cathy had by now become suspicious of Dennis, and she was becoming more and more certain in her heart, day by day, that he had hurt her daughter. And so Cathy made a Freedom of Information request for Dennis's criminal history, if he had any. The results were staggering. In 1980, he was arrested after a young woman claimed he attempted to lure her into a wooded area in western Michigan and assault her. He pleaded guilty to the assault after working out a deal with prosecutors. However, something that's key for what will happen, what we'll find out later, there was a 2-week period that he was unable to attend the court hearings in September 1980 because he said he was a member of the United States Navy Reserve and he was required to attend a 2-week drill in Virginia. So this will be important later. In 1998, Dennis Bowman was arrested for breaking and entering the home of a co-worker in Ottawa County to steal items, including women's lingerie. Before his sentencing in the case, he referenced his missing daughter in a letter to the presiding judge. He said, "I'm the father of 2 lovely daughters, one 25 and the other 11. And I feel that being a parent is one of the most important and sobering things a person can undertake." Maybe he failed to mention that the one that was 25 actually had been missing for 16 years. Anyway, Cathy's suspicions were even further inflamed when through the Facebook page, she was contacted by a young girl called Meta, who believed that she had a connection to the disappearance of Andrea. Meta McLeod said she was abducted at the Windmill gas station in 1989 when she was just 6 years old. And because of the timeline, and she had seen information about Andrea's disappearance on Facebook, she believed her case could be related to Andrea's disappearance. When she was shown a photo of Dennis, she identified him as the man that had kidnapped her, attempted to assault her. He was thwarted, luckily, when a car went by and he was forced to flee. He had told her, he picked her up, he told her He was going to show her some puppies. You know, like they literally, abusers do say that. It's like a sort of standing joke, isn't it? Like, would you like a sweetie or would you like to see a puppy? But this is what they do. She was 6 years old. And he took her. He took her in his pickup truck that she identified later. Well, I say identified, described later, an old red pickup truck. And she realised they were going quite a long way, and she kept asking him, when will we get there? You know, are we nearly there, etc. And he was just quiet, but she said he was nice to her until they arrived at like a woodland area, and then she said he just changed completely. Anyway, she managed to run away, and a car was going by, so he got in his pickup truck and off he went. And she was safe. I mean, I think he had already assaulted her, but you know, obviously he was planning to do a lot more to her. So she was safe. So by now, Cathy just felt inside that Dennis definitely had done something to her daughter, to Alexis. And she actually started to harass him, phoning him up. In the end, they changed their phone number, him and Brenda, because, of course, Brenda wasn't having any of it. You know, despite Brenda knowing about his other offences, she still would not believe that he had done anything to Andrea. But Cathy knew that he had inside. And really, it's quite logical, isn't it? After finding out all that about this man and the true character of this Sunday school teacher, you know, with the perfect family man, or, you know, he's got this wife who defends him, everything he does. You know, she's just as complicit in many ways, isn't she? Because she knew, you know, there are wives out there who don't know anything about what their husbands are getting up to. So when they do find out, it is a big shock because it comes completely out of the blue. But Brenda knew what Dennis had done to other women. And she just would not accept that it was possible that he may have done something to Andrea. So they complained to the police. Dennis, and that will be important later on, Dennis and Brenda complained to the police, phoned the police, stop this woman harassing us, blah, blah, blah. Didn't work. Cathy kept on harassing them. She had a billboard put up that Dennis, you know, looking for Andrea, that Dennis would have to see every day when he left the house. She wanted him to look at Andrea's face day in, day out, and never forget that she was on his trail. Now, she started to get a feeling that he had killed Andrea and buried her in the backyard of his property. And she felt a pull to that house, to the ground. She was sending drones up. She was convinced that there was something strange about the land around the house. But it didn't make sense because actually he'd moved into this property after Andrea's disappearance. He wasn't living there when Andrea disappeared. So how could Andrea be buried in a house that they moved to, in the terrain of a house that they moved to afterwards? But she really felt it, Cathy, and she said she felt her daughter was screaming out to tell people where she was. But of course, again, he wasn't living there at the time she disappeared. Anyway, she continued to harass him. She had posters put up near him. As I say, she wanted him to look at Alexis's face every day. Then a massive development in the whole thing. One day in 2019, so not that long ago, 5 years ago from when I'm making this video, Meta, the other young lady who was certain that Dennis Bowman had assaulted her when she was 6 years old, kidnapped her, rang her to say, "You've been arrested." And he did not know it, but there was a lot going on behind the scenes. He had been ensnared by Cathy. So clever Dennis thought he was clever, but wasn't as clever. He was quite clever because he evaded prison, life in prison for such a long time. But he wasn't so clever as he thought he was, and Cathy and the police had outwitted him. Now, it wasn't an arrest for what you'd think it was. It was a completely different case, right over in Virginia. A murder of a young woman, 26 years old, Kathleen Doyle, in 1980. This was what he'd been arrested for. Now, right over the other side of the country, complete bolt from the blue. No, he'd never been a suspect in that case. Well, he was on a list of suspects eventually that they drew up, but at the time when it happened, they did not have the DNA. I mean, this is the miracle of DNA again. So many murderers out there who'll be really, really waiting day in, day out when the knock's going to come on their door for these cases that are getting solved by DNA, advances in DNA. So what had happened is that on September the 11th in 1980, it says 25 here now, but it's 25 or 26-year-old Kathleen Doyle was brutally attacked and murdered in her own home in Norfolk, Virginia. Her husband was in the military and he was stationed at that time away from home. She was alone, and her body was discovered by a friend the next day. Now, when the police, as advancements in DNA progressed, the police drew up a list of anyone who was in the area at that time, that was to do with the military, because what they concluded was obviously it could not be her husband. Husbands are always the first suspects, aren't they? But he was stationed miles away, so they knew for sure it wasn't him. So they felt like it must be somebody who was either stationed in the area or from around the area, obviously, somebody local. And they made a long list. Once they got the DNA profile, finally, they made a list of anyone that it could possibly be. And Dennis Bowman was at the end of that list. He was the last one on that list. And of course, if you think back to that other case earlier, that was a reason that he gave to the judge for 2 weeks that he couldn't attend that trial, was because he was away in the Army Reserves. And that's where he was, in Virginia. So as he was telling that court why he could not make it for those hearings, he was murdering another woman over in Virginia. He's a foul man. Obviously on the True Crime Channel, we talk about a lot of foul people. But this Dennis Bowman, he is the epitome of evil in my eyes. And I think there'll be much more to know about him. In all the years he was free to sort of be a predator, I expect there were many more cases. Anyway, they'd finally got a profile together, and it was matched. So he was the last one on the list to match with the DNA, but obviously they didn't want to frighten Dennis. They didn't want to spook him. So they sat down and thought about how could they. Because then the detective that was in charge of the case in Virginia, when he started to look into Dennis, who I say was the last person on the list, and he saw, of course, the other thing that will have improved is databases, like different states at one time in America weren't linked up, with information, etc. And of course, by then they were. So when he sat down to look at Dennis Bowman's history from where he was living now, saw that he had these criminal charges, saw that his daughter, his adoptive daughter, Andrea, had been missing for all that time. And, you know, that made Dennis a likely suspect, didn't it, in this murder? But the problem was how to get him to voluntarily give his DNA, because, you know, they didn't want to spook him, as I say, make him give a sample. They sat down all together and thought about how they could do it without him realising. And they came up with a brilliant idea, and they did. Dennis and Brenda did not realise that really they invited this idea, because they'd been complaining about Cathy for so long. About Alexis's biological mum. They'd been complaining that she was harassing them. So the police invited them to the police station. They invited Dennis and Cathy. Sorry, not Cathy. Dennis and Brenda, his wife, Andrea's adoptive mum, invited them to the police station and said, come on, we'll come and talk about it. Let's talk about it, how we can resolve this. They invited them to the police station to have a chat, offered them a drink. And they both accepted, and they both had a drink. And when Dennis Bowman left his cup that he'd had whatever drink it was in, coffee or water or whatever it was, there you go, the police had a DNA sample. And guess what? They took the DNA sample off, and it matched to the murder, the brutal murder of Kathleen Doyle over in Virginia. So this is the man that they were dealing with. So they arrested him. Oh God, I would have liked to have been a fly in the wall. Well, actually, I've seen the interview where they arrested him. And the policeman sits down with him, shows him his badge. And he says, do you know why you're here? And of course, Dennis goes, no. Why have they always got whiny voices, these monsters? And he said, well, this is my badge. I'm from Virginia. Now, do you imagine Dennis, his face or his stomach must have dropped, mustn't it? Because he wasn't expecting that. I expect when he got arrested, he thought he was being arrested, something to do with Andrea. Oh, God, there could have been loads of things. I'm sure he's done lots of other things as well, so he probably didn't have a clue which one of these things. And, of course, that the death of Kathleen had happened so long ago, you know, in 1980. And this was 2019. God, so it's nearly 30 years earlier this poor woman had been murdered. So he must have thought he'd got away with that one, but who knows what other things he'd done. So if Cathy ensnared him because, or he and Brenda were ensnared by their own complaints about Cathy. They were so busy complaining about Cathy, didn't even think that he might have been invited there to give a DNA sample unwittingly. So he was caught for that and he was arrested. Brenda was completely in denial. She said, oh, well, it was 30 years ago, as if that doesn't matter then. As well, like, oh, well, it was 30 years ago. What are you making a fuss about this now? You know, that's how it sounded, what she was saying. And then, you know, she came straight out of that interview with the police and said, oh, well, we're going to get a lawyer to one of her family members. We're going to get a lawyer. He hasn't done anything. They're just trying to throw this at him. I've never known a woman so much in denial. I mean, I've seen denial watching these true crime things and that, and quite often wives and husbands, I expect, are in denial. But I think Cathy is the most one, you know, because even though she knew he had done things, because, you know, he'd pled guilty to other things before, he'd served time in prison, you know, she knew that he had this in him, but she still denied every new thing, and she still would not face up to the fact that he'd probably done something to Andrea. So that detective in Virginia, he did well to look into Dennis and realize that they needed this DNA profile from him. The police that eventually got the DNA profile, they did well. So it's although I think this case, this story, if you like, this true crime story, started off with failings by the police for not investigating poor Andrea's disappearance properly, I do think as time went on, at least they got their act together a bit more. So yeah, that's why he was arrested. And Brenda was still in complete denial. She refused to believe he was guilty. And as I say, this is like a mental health issue, isn't it? Isn't it incredible how people can only believe what they want to believe, regardless of evidence to the contrary? Doesn't matter what evidence you show them for something, they just sort of push that aside and concentrate on what, it's confirmation bias, isn't it? So Dennis, a truly evil man, a true monster. We talk about monsters and, everybody who commits murder is a monster up to a point, aren't they? But Dennis was a real, he was a danger to women all those years, 30 years. How many other women, children as well, maybe suffered that just hasn't been solved yet. As far as Andrea was concerned, so of course this meant that the police turned up the heat about Andrea, but he was still denied anything to do with that. Nothing to do with that. He came home, she'd gone, he'd never had anything to do with it. Then the police and the prosecution came up with a brilliant idea. They offered him a deal. Because the thing is, because the other murder was in Virginia, he was due to be extradited to Virginia, which was miles away from Michigan. And this would make it difficult for Brenda to visit him. And he only had Brenda. And his daughter Vanessa, she was supporting him as well, but we don't know much about her, but she was definitely at that point supporting her father. Now, of course, the police were recording every phone call, every video call between them, etc. So they knew how important Brenda was to Dennis. Now, the more I've watched those interviews, and those communications between them, I really think Dennis is a complete psychopath, but I do think he can copy emotions. So Brenda, she's like the opposite. She gets all upset, like she believes everything he says. And then when he finally confesses a lie to her, she gets upset, and he sort of mirrors her emotions, but I don't think they're genuine emotions, his own emotions. He's just copying them. He's learned how to copy emotion. I don't think he feels any emotion, not for anyone or anything, not even for Brenda. He'll say that he loves Brenda, but really all it is she's all he's got. So, what is he going to do? He can't sort of terminate things with Brenda because he'd have nobody then to talk to or anything. Anyway, and he can control Brenda. I think she's sort of quite tough in her own way, but he controls her emotionally. She cannot accept who he really is, even though she's got proof. The man she's been sleeping with for all these years since she was in high school, the man she's been sharing a bed with, sharing a life with, brought up children with, she cannot accept who he really is. So yeah, he was about to be extradited to Virginia. This was in 2020 for the murder of poor Kathleen. And the police knew that he would prefer to serve his sentence near to Brenda so she could visit in person. So they said to her that if he, confessed to Andrea's murder, came clean, they would make sure, they said that their dad had permission, they would make sure that he got to serve his sentence in Michigan. But as it was, he would have to serve it in Virginia because the case that he was being tried for was in Virginia. But if he was tried for a case in Michigan, in other words, the murder of Andrea, if he cooperated, they could make sure that he would be held in prison there instead of Virginia. And then Brenda would be able to go and visit. So guess what? He confessed to Brenda. They brought Brenda in. He confessed. Well, say he confessed. The first story, we've got a few stories to go through here. First story was, please watch this video till the end because there's so many twists and turns. Don't think it's all cut and dried when I start telling you some things. Please don't think it's cut and dried. There's so much to this story. So he confessed, and he said he had got home from taking Brenda to work that day. He put the baby on the sofa because he had the baby with him, Vanessa. And then he started arguing with Andrea at the top of the stairs. He said she'd fallen down the stairs by accident and broken her neck. So he didn't bother trying to get an ambulance. He could see she was dead. She was dead. So he started thinking, oh my God, I don't know what he said to Brenda about why he thought he would cover it up rather than just saying this was supposedly an accident that she fell down the stairs. Anyway, panicked. He told Brenda that he panicked and he put her body into a metal barrel. But not only that, he had to dismember her to put her into this metal barrel to fit her in. So this is his adoptive daughter who's fallen down the stairs, according to him, by accident, broken her neck. So he felt he was going to stuff her into a metal barrel, and he had to cut her in half or dismember her to fit her in this barrel. Yeah, you think? Then he said, this is story number one. There's a few different stories to come. He said he took that metal barrel and he put it next to the neighbour's rubbish, where apparently the refuse collectors were due to come. And by the next day, it was gone. So this was his story. This was his story. Truly evil man. Brenda was crying, so he was crying with her. He was just copying her emotions, and as I said earlier, watching his confession to Brenda, it is evident that he's a psychopath. Brenda's a perfect patsy for a man like that. She's so determined to believe him. Any old rubbish he says, she just wants to believe. She'll cling on. So she'll hear that, that he's put Andrea's remains, cut them up and put them in a barrel. But she'll cling on to the bit that it was an accident. It was an accident that she fell down the stairs. She'll cling on to that bit. Oh, yeah, he cut her up and he put her in the barrel. She actually even said to one of her family, oh, God, people are talking as if she was alive when he cut her up. As if, because she was dead. She clings on to any positive thing. Oh, well, it was an accident. Oh, well, she wasn't alive when he cut her up. This is Brenda's mentality. I actually find that terrifying that somebody can be that distanced from the truth. So she accepted that. How he disposed of her, how she died. But who didn't? Well, apart from the police, Cathy, Alexis's mum, the biological mother of this poor girl. She didn't believe it. So the police said to him, no, We're not going to promise you a return to Michigan after the Kathleen Doyle trial. We don't believe you. You know, they called his bluff. They said, we don't believe you. Anyway, Dennis showed even more vileness then, if it's possible, because what he would do, he would contact Brenda by video link or by letter, etc., phone. He knew that the police were recording everything or looking through all the letters. He knew that. So what he would do was make different statements to Brenda, knowing that the police were listening to it or reading it. So eventually he said, he didn't put Andrea out for the rubbish. He buried her with respect. You know, he said prayers over her body and put things like religious things in with her. And so, you know, he buried her somewhere next to a cemetery, I think was the first thing he said. So he buried her with respect near a cemetery. And other things that he said. So the police checked out, well, they had to, didn't they? So where he said he'd buried her, the police had to go and dig all that up and look for her. But they didn't find anything. He was playing with them. He was enjoying it because Dennis now is in prison. All the things, this again makes me feel certain that he was doing so many other things, because even in prison, just for that short time, he could not resist playing with people, manipulating people. He did it through Brenda, but he was manipulating the police through Brenda, but he was also manipulating Brenda. He didn't care about Brenda's feelings. He did it, all those years he'd kept Andrea's death from her. Now he's keeps changing where he's buried her and what he did with her. And Brenda's just, every time he tells her another lie or she finds out that something was a lie, she's still trusting him. So you do get to a point where you think, Brenda, you deserve everything you get. You're a tosser yourself. Because how many times does a man have to lie to you? First of all, he's lied to you for 30 years saying he had nothing to do with Andrea's disappearance. Then you find out he did. Then you find out he put her in a barrel, according to him. Then you find out he dismembered her, according to him. Then you find out, no, he didn't put her in a barrel out for the rubbish. He buried her near a cemetery. And you still believe in him every time that he comes out with a new load of cojones. I mean, so Brenda, to be honest, I have no sympathy now with Brenda at all. I would always have sympathy for a woman who suddenly finds out that her husband's not the man she thought he was. But when it goes on and on and on, you think you've got to take responsibility yourself for your own stupidity. So he knew well that all these phone calls and letters were being monitored, and he knew that whatever he said in those, the police would have to check out, because the police by now, they can't say, oh, we're not checking that out because he lied the last time. They had to check everything out. So yeah, he was enjoying the power. He was playing with the police. He was playing with Brenda. That was the only way he could get his jollies. Now, he couldn't go out attacking women anymore. So that was the way he was getting his pleasure. Anyway, finally, this went on some time. And finally, he did admit where she was. Really, where she was. She was dismembered. She was put in a barrel. That was true. But he hadn't put it out with the rubbish, though. He had buried it, first of all, where they were living at the time. So if the police would have dug up the garden or the land around it, they would have found her then. But, of course, they were treating her as a runaway. They had all these sightings of her, and just think, God, if only you could have found her so much quicker, couldn't they? But anyway, they didn't, and that's it. So... And then when they bought the new house, just before they were about to move to the new house years later, he took the barrel and buried it in the new house, in the grounds of the new house. Exactly where Cathy had Alexis's biological mother, exactly where Cathy had said she felt that she was. She was there. I've just got a shiver there talking about that. Incredible. She'd been saying that for years, that she knew that it was strange because it was a house that they weren't living in at the time when Andrea went missing. But Cathy, the biological mother, had felt really strongly that Alexis, as she knew her, was in there. And she was. And she was so right what she said at the time. She said, I knew he wouldn't have let her go far away from, because he felt that she was his property and he would want to keep her nearby. And he did. To such an extent that even when they moved house, he dug up the barrel with her body in and took it. And then he put it in the new house and covered it with a thin layer of cement. Aye. So that's where Cathy's instincts had screamed out to her that was where her daughter Alexis was. And I like to think that Alexis was speaking through her biological mother, because, you know, she would have probably spoke through Brenda as well, because although there's not a blood tie there, she was her mother. But the thing is, Brenda wasn't listening. You know, bloody poor Alexis or Andrea, she could have appeared as a ghost to Brenda and said, I'm in the garden of this house. And Brenda would have not acknowledged it. You know, like she could have, so she probably just gave up. It's probably what it did. If you believe in the spirit world and this, that and the other. I do, and I believe she probably would have tried to tell her, she probably tried to tell her sister, Vanessa, where she was, but they weren't listening. Sometimes you just can't, if you're deaf, you cannot hear, you know. So it's like Brenda would be like, oh, she just wouldn't have accepted it, as say, even if Andrea just appeared to her in a dream face to face and said, look, Mum, this is where I am, she wouldn't have accepted it. Whereas Cathy knew it. She felt it. She felt that Alexis was speaking through her. And I believe she was. I like to think she was. So searches were made. And finally, Alexis, Andrea, was discovered in the barrel, dismembered in 4 plastic bags. So we'll never know the truth of what happened that day. We can't rely on Dennis for a true account of exactly what happened on that day. Did they have an argument because he was trying to abuse her? Or was she trying to leave and he was trying to stop her? Did she fall down the stairs? Was she pushed down the stairs? He's saying now that he did hit her on the head. He has admitted to hitting her on the head, but I think probably there was some sex abuse involved as well. But we'll never know, because we can't rely on Dennis for a true account, can we? But the police stated he confessed to striking her, causing her to die of a resulting head injury, and then he dismembered her body with an axe and a machete. Dennis Bowman is a truly vile man. I think there are more crimes that he's committed against women and children that will never be known, unless he finally has a last minute, because he's elderly now. So, meanwhile, Brenda and his bio daughter Vanessa, that had defended him for years. Does she finally accept now, I wonder, what an evil monster she was sharing her bed with?
And I walked right in it, and I won't be out of it until I get all the way through it. And I'm not all the way through it yet. I want her body back.
Dennis Bauman, the Allegan County man who confessed to murdering his adopted daughter back in 1989, finally sentenced in her killing this morning.
The 14-year-old girl was adopted just 9 months old. Her biological mother was in court for that sentencing today and spoke to Fox 17's Michael Martin after Bauman's fate was sealed. Michael joins us live in the studio with the latest on this case. And Michael, at one point, this investigation had gone cold.
Janice, Josh, it had for a long time. Now, she was known as Andrea Michelle Bauman when she disappeared in March 1989, adopted by the family 13 years prior. Her biological mom, Cathy Terkanian, first named her Alexis before giving her up for a better life than she could provide at the time. What she couldn't know at the time, was that Dennis Bauman would end up being the one to cut her life down short. Now, he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars paying for his crimes.
Mr. Bowman, you're here for sentencing today.
Early Monday morning, Dennis Bowman, now 72 years old, walked nonchalantly into an Allegan County courtroom to be sentenced for the 1989 murder of his adopted daughter.
At 14 years old, she had the courage to disclose that her adopted father, Dennis Bowman, had been sexually abusing her.
Andrea Michelle Bowman disappeared March 11th, 1989, just months after she told teachers and police that Dennis was sexually assaulting her. For decades, her adopted family told investigators she had stolen $100 cash and simply run away.
That you would chop her body up with an axe and keep it close to you. I'm not sure what that means. But you didn't get rid of the body completely.
Dennis Bowman eventually admitted to killing his daughter and burying her body in the backyard of his Allegan County home. But that confession wouldn't come before he was implicated in another violent crime, the 1980 rape and murder of Norfolk, Virginia woman Kathleen Doyle.
But when faced with extradition to Virginia for another matter, he finally confessed that Andrea was indeed buried in his own backyard. He further confessed that he tried to dismember her body with a machete, but that didn't work. So he switched to an axe to put her into a barrel.
Andrea was buried in his backyard under a thin layer of concrete, not 100 feet from where a missing poster with her face hung for years.
Will Mr. Bowman be looked into for additional crimes in the area here or in Norfolk?
Law enforcement, when the opportunity arises, will continue to look at that. But at this point, our focus has been on Andrea and finding justice for her.
Cathy Terkanian, the girl's biological mom, has also been focused on Andrea, or Alexis, the name she originally gave her daughter, suspecting Dennis Bauman of killing her daughter for years before he was actually charged.
To know what we've gone through to get justice for Alexis, I mean, what would you say to her now that you've done it?
I would say rest in peace, baby girl.
Bauman is already facing 2 life sentences for that murder in Virginia. On Monday, he received an additional 35 to 50 years for Andrea's death.
His numerous assaults, his behavior in this case, his other convictions all clearly indicate that Mr. Bauman is a serious, dangerous man that has harmed many communities, many families.
I spent 10 years trying to get this monster, and to see that happen without ever seeing his face or hearing his voice, it's amazing to me.
For Cathy, she always knew that Monday's hearing would happen eventually. She's felt it deep in her soul since she found out the daughter she had tried to give a better life was taken by the man entrusted to protect her.
And, you know, maybe I'm just all the women he ever raped, all the women he ever killed right here. Maybe I'm my little daughter that hovered over all of it, watched it all, heard him confess about it, heard him talk about it, you know? Maybe I'm his worst nightmare, huh?
Yeah, so certainly an end to a case that we've been following for many years now. Cathy is trying to get her daughter's remains back so she can give her a proper burial. She told me earlier today that Dennis Bauman's wife, Brenda, has given her just half of those remains. She says she won't give up until she has all of her daughter back. For now, live in the studio.
Does she know? Does she accept it? Does Vanessa accept what sort of man her father is? You know, I think possibly not. because the potential for denial in the human brain is mind-boggling. And the sad fact is that Dennis Bowman, he lived as a free man for his entire life. Really, it's only a couple of years ago that he's gone to prison due to the incompetence of law enforcement at the time, and who accepted that she was a runaway, and they did not investigate properly her disappearance. And also, I blame the people that said they'd seen her. They hadn't seen her. That's why you can't take witness statements, these sightings, because people do look alike. Sometimes you do see people and you think it's them. So really, his crimes only came to light after this mother, Cathy Terkanian, the mother who had to give up her daughter when she was 16 years old. How she's made up for it now, hasn't she? But of course, she must regret every day she didn't spend with her daughter. It must be a sort of very bittersweet, she's got very bittersweet justice. She gave her daughter away because she thought she was doing the best for her daughter, and she did not know she was putting her daughter in the path of this vile man. So Dennis pled guilty. Oh, and if Cathy wouldn't have pursued it after, finding out that she was missing, because she got that request for DNA, she would never have known she probably waited her whole life hoping that Alexis would come looking for her, and then she didn't. Obviously she couldn't, even though she was planning to, but Dennis put a stop to that, didn't he? She would never have known, would she, about all this? And it's her that has brought this man to justice, not only for the death of her daughter, but for other crimes as well. So Dennis pled guilty to both the murder of Andrea and Kathleen Doyle. But, I think he only did that because he thought he was going back to Michigan. But he was in for a shock because the police reneged on the promise they made to have him transferred back to Michigan. He's still in Virginia. He's going to stay in Virginia. And Brenda cannot make personal visits. So the police lied to him. Oh my God, how terrible. Good, Dennis. That's what it's like when people lie to you and manipulate you. You think you're the master manipulator. You've been manipulated. So he will never get out of prison. He's been given, I think, life sentence. I think he's in his 70s or 80s. So the master manipulator was finally tricked himself. Good. And that word, good, that's exactly what he said when the police were interviewing him, and they asked him after they knew that he'd confessed to killing Andrea. And they were interviewing him, and the police asked him, what did you think when these reports came in about sightings of Andrea? And he said, I thought, good. Good. Well, good, Dennis. Good that you're where you are and never come out of prison. It happened too late. Unfortunately, you did get a chance to bring up your other daughter, to have a life, to commit more atrocities, but good that you won't be able to do anymore. And you've got your next, this punishment that you're facing, Dennis, in this life is nothing to what you're going to face in the next life when you have to pay. You're a Sunday school teacher, you know what's going to happen to you when you pass on to the next life. You have to atone for your sins then. So I hope your soul's ready for that. So yeah, that is the problem with false sightings. They can divert the course of investigations. So in this case, they confirmed the police bias that Andrea had run away. But a little bit more investigation would have shown she would never have left the baby if friends said that. I don't think the police even went and asked her friends things. And that she had reported for Dennis for abuse too. All these things should have been investigating. And also that he had a record of criminal activity. Why did they not investigate him? So really searching around the original house where they were living when Andrea went missing would have revealed her body. Her body was there. Anyway, so there is justice, at least, but there's one more indignity. And this last indignity for Andrea and for Cathy, the biological mother, is made by Brenda. So do you know what? I have equal revulsion for Brenda that I have for Dennis, because Brenda didn't kill anyone, she didn't dismember anyone, but she facilitated, she enabled this man, and I can't forgive her for that. So I don't know how Cathy, I think Cathy feels the same, but I don't blame her. Cannot forgive her for it, the way she covered up for him. Not the first time. The first time, give everyone a second chance. But as time went on, still now, believing lies that he's telling. The final indignity was when she got, because of course she is the legal mum. Cathy had signed away her rights as a mother. So Cathy still, even after all this, didn't really have any rights, in legal rights. So when Alexis's remains, when the forensic examiner had finished with them, when the trial was over, etc., they were given to Brenda. And Brenda had the remains cremated, and split them in half, and gave half to Cathy. Now, you might think, at least she gave Cathy half. But this child had been dismembered. So to Cathy, that was like cutting her in half twice. I don't know how Brenda had the cheek to keep any of those remains. She didn't care about Andrea. When Andrea went missing, she said she was a liar. One of her interviews said, there's one thing I can't stand, it's a liar. Andrea's a liar, what she was saying about Dennis. How dare she? How dare she keep any of those remains? And how dare she split that child into half again? And that's how Cathy felt. She was like me. She was probably glad to get some of Alexis back. She should have been given the whole of Alexis, shouldn't she? I think so. But it's because of the dismemberment that Dennis had got. So it's like a double dismemberment, isn't it? Brenda is can't even say what I think of Brenda. It's a bad word, put it that way. It begins with C. She is a horrible person to do that, to not even register that would feel like, why did she not give all the remains? She should have felt guilty, so guilty. She should have at least returned Alexis to her mum. It was her mum. Brenda's her legal mum. And, if she was a good mum, she's got as much, lots of adopted parents out there. I'm not having a pop at adopted parents. There's loads of adopted parents out there that are fantastic, loving, true mums and dads. But Brenda wasn't. So she had no right. She has a legal right to keep those remains, but she does not have a moral right to keep any of those remains. Should have given them all to Cathy and let Cathy, have Andrea or Alexis. She made a mistake giving her up, but she was 16 years old. I'm sure she lives with that every day. She doesn't need anybody else to tell her that. But at least give her back, let her, because she found her. If it wasn't for her, Andrea would still be there, because he would never have told what had happened to Andrea unless he thought there was something in it for him. He may have still been in prison for the Virginia thing, but he would never have volunteered what happened to Andrea. So the only reason those remains have been collected is because of Cathy and the pressure she put on him. So she should have them, in my opinion. So how dare she split her body again? How dare she? Because if it wasn't for the doggedness, determination, and the mother's instinct, just shows you there is an instinct that goes beyond whether you know, they say blood is thicker than water. In some ways, she definitely had some sort of instinct about her daughter for whatever reason. Maybe she's just more receptive to that kind of things. As I say, maybe Andrea did sort of try and, you know, in the spirit way, try and communicate with Brenda, the adoptive mum. She just was so, all she cared about, all that mattered to her was Dennis. So she wouldn't have got that message. Yeah, she doesn't deserve any part of her because she referred to her as a liar. Well, it was Dennis who was lying, but she believed Dennis over her own daughter. So yeah, in my eyes, women like Brenda who refuse to believe the truth, even though it's literally staring them in the face, have literally had evidence, are just as guilty as the men they defend. What do you think? Let me know in comments. Is it a mental illness? Should we feel sorry for Brenda? Well, I can't, but anyway, maybe we should. So Brenda, she failed in her duty as a mother, didn't she? And it makes you wonder if the sister that Andrea stayed to protect, Vanessa, received any of the same treatment from Dennis. Well, because she supported him too, at least till his confession. Maybe she doesn't support him now. Anyway, that is the story. And, say story, it's a true crime story. You couldn't make it up, could you? You know, it's an incredible case, I think. It totally... there's a really good documentary on, like a mini-series, 2 episodes, on Netflix, Fire and Into the Fire, it's called. It's a very, very good documentary. I got a lot of my information there. Well, that's where I saw about the case first. I don't know why I'd never noticed it before, because it's quite a recent case, but I hadn't realised it. When you look into it, it's a sad story. So I'm going to go back to what I said right at the beginning. It's a true crime story. There are victims, so these cases are always sad. But to me, there's a real inspiration here, not giving up. You know, it just shows what you can achieve. Now, that would have been easy for Cathy when she first found out that Andrea had gone missing. She could have left it. You know, she hadn't ever had any contact with Andrea since when she was 10 months old. She could have, I don't know, she could have given up at any time, and she didn't, did she? And because of her, and because of her doggedness and determination. So that makes it also a story of love. Like, she didn't give up Alexis because she didn't love her. She did love her. And there was a connection between them. But she gave her up because she didn't think she could look after her. Because she thought she was giving her up to this fantastic life. You know, family, that she'd get adopted by this fabulous family, and she might have done. There are fabulous adoptive families out there, I know, but unfortunately this didn't happen to Alexis. And, you know, Cathy was waiting, hoping that one day Andrea would come looking for her, and she would have done if she was given a chance, it seems. So it is a story of courage, dogged determination, and justice. Because in the end, even though it was late, there has been justice for Andrea and Kathleen and all the other victims that he had. Meta. Oh, he's never admitted to the kidnap of Meta, The lady we talked about, the girl who was kidnapped when she was 6, he's never admitted to that. Thing about Dennis is he will not admit to anything unless he's sure, unless there's either something in it for him, as in Andrea's case, to try and get kept in the prison in Michigan, or the other case of Kathleen, it was DNA and he couldn't refute it. But obviously there wasn't enough evidence in Meta's case. So he's still saying, no, he had nothing to do with that. He's had something to do with loads of other things, I think. But he'll only admit to them when he's cornered, because that's what he is, a predator. These people, they will lie, right till they just can't lie anymore because the evidence, is there. Or there's something in it for them. Like with him, with the bargaining chip to stay in the Michigan prison. I'm so glad that they didn't. I'm so glad that the police reneged on that deal. The deal they made with him, and he believed it. The master manipulator was manipulated. Okay, I'll see you really soon in the next video. And, of course, until then, as ever, may your God go with you. Bye.